I want to really congratulate Deputy Ruth Copinger on putting this bill, and in its simplicity almost, it actually does what we really need and needed a long time in this state. I also think that the bill really complements the current campaign to repeal the 8th Amendment, because all of us who were engaged in the process of watching the Citizens' Assembly, learning from it, and then engaged in the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the 8th Amendment will be aware that one of the strong recommendations from that process connected to the question of crisis pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy is the question of non-ethos, factually based sex education in our schools. Now, sex education in Ireland has been mandatory for the last 30 years. It is a crucial element, and the first one, fertility control and sex control. Research confirms that in Ireland and elsewhere, those who have received sex education, proper sex education, factual sex education, are more likely to use contraception, are more likely to be clean from sexually transmitted diseases, and are less likely to experience crisis pregnancies in their teenage years and often later in life. So the contribution that this measure could bring to improving the sexual reproductive health generally in Irish society will be enormous. The Crisis Pregnancy Agency, well, formerly called the Crisis Pregnancy Agency of the HSE, commissioned research on this area some time ago. But it needs to be updated, and much more is needed, particularly from the Department of Education and not just from the Department of Health. Because sex education works, but it could work much, much better if it was better. For example, we learnt on the deliberations in the 8th Committee that in Holland, sex education from the age of 10 was made compulsory, obviously appropriate to the age of the children as it was delivered, but it was made compulsory in 2012 at the age of 10, and between 2012 and 2016, statistics show that crisis pregnancies in teenagers reduced by 30%. That's quite a startling result, and if that result was shown in the delivery of change in terms of crisis pregnancy, then one could extrapolate that a similar result would be shown in relation to the health of relationships, the issue of consent, the question of how young people deal with their sexuality and with the issues surrounding it. There are at least some 5,000 or so crisis pregnancies in Ireland every year that could be avoided if we were to deal with sexual education in a correct way, if you were to extrapolate from the figures in Holland. And you would also curtail the rising levels of sexually transmitted diseases among young people. I learned today from a group that represents LGBT plus community that the biggest rise of HIV among men is in teenage young men who are not being educated about protection, who are not being educated about their own sexuality, and who do face the sort of mental and personal crises that Deputy Paul Murphy has talked about. And as has been pointed out, the school ethos trumps all of the other considerations in the delivery of sex education. The RSE, as it's called, the relationship and sex education to students at both post-primary and primary level, are trumped by the consideration of the school ethos. The RSE programme has been described as too little too late. Age appropriateness has been determined largely by the Catholic Church, and very little of the primary programme prepare children for the approaching adolescence and its challenges. At post-primary level, the situation gets even worse, with some of the most vulnerable children, like early school leavers, missing out on lessons that deal with aspects of RSE most relevant to their needs, because these lessons are delayed until the final year. And as a community activist, I can tell you that the best sex education is delivered by youth groups in the community. But the numbers of young people who go through that service are much, much more limited than the numbers of young people that go through schools. In fact, most youth services capture the children most at risk, but not all of them. So there's a very, very limited amount of young people who get the delivery of proper sex education, discussion, non-ethos based, factual, biologically correct education through the youth services. However, hats off to the youth services and to those youth workers who do deliver those in the community. Children with special needs because of disability and challenging behaviours, or children from ethnic minority, traveller backgrounds, or from new communities are very, very poorly catered for in our system. And a very worrying aspect of RSE, particularly at post-primary level, is that it is contracted out, and contracted it out often to what are called visitor or outside facilitators. The vast, vast majority of them are from agencies run by or strongly associated with the Catholic Church. When asked at the Dáil Committee about what regulation the department, your department minister, has over these agencies, we were told by the department official, Ms Egan, there is no regulation of such agencies. If an agency has an approach inconsistent with good educational practice and at variance with this policy of the school will not engage them. But the department has no regulation over them. I think that's quite a shocking fact. There's very little monitoring or evaluation of what these visitors actually do in the classroom in practice, and there's no national audit of the extent to which they are used or how effective they are. But the limited research available indicates around 40% of our schools use them, and in some schools, particularly at senior level, 90% of RSE classes are given by outside facilitators or visitors, most of them with a strong Catholic ethos. The challenges facing our children to developing a healthy attitude to sex and relationships are enormous, and particularly in the age of online pornography, sexual predators and widespread misogyny, as has been witnessed by the issues that were thrown up, as referred to by the Me Too campaign, the recent Belfast rape trial, and how that has brought out in young people an admission that they are daily faced with misogynistic attitudes that they don't know how to handle because they are not being educated properly and factually in dealing with sex and sexuality. Our children need and deserve the best preparation for adult life, and they are very unlikely to receive that from an institution that has historically shown more concern for its own institutional power than it has for the children over whom it wielded that power. So I think it's about time that we really did do, as Deputy Murphy said, that we don't just pay lip service to this, but we see it right through the end as soon as possible and have full, proper, non-ethos-based education for all children in all our schools, and that it is made compulsory as it has been in other European countries. We don't have to look very far. Results in Britain, who made sex education from an early age compulsory in 2012 and beyond, the same in the Netherlands, show the absolute positive outcomes when you remove it from ethos base, when you deliver it to children at appropriate levels at appropriate ages, and when you're inclusive of all gender and of all sexual preferences and of all potential sexuality that children and others express. And I think it's amazing that we're even having this frank conversation in this House. God be with the days when you wouldn't be allowed to say the word sex in Dáil Éireann, and the fact that we can have this open, proper discussion now, I think is a tribute to the bill and to Deputy Copinger for bringing it forward. But I would like to reiterate and to appeal to the Minister and your Cabinet and your party, let's see this through ASAP and stop delaying what our children deserve in this country.